Walmart's Information Systems Division, responsible for Retail Link, the company's vendor portal. I got the job on Friday, and by Sunday morning at 3 a.m., things had started to break left and right. We'd fix one thing, and then something else would break. Sometimes it was hardware issues, sometimes it was software, sometimes it was network. For 6 months, this went on, things breaking, one thing after another. We had many situations when we had to come in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., 2 a.m., and work whole day. I had been brought into the role for my business experience. I had previously been a buyer with Walmart, and here I was addressing only technical issues about which I knew nothing. And I know it's rare to see an Indian who isn't an IT, but I was one of them. I was definitely one of them, and I knew nothing about technology. I had to manage these war rooms, which were groups of 20 or 30 or even more people, and they were broken down into smaller subgroups, each subgroup looking at a different issue and trying to tackle the problem and find the solution and fix it. I had to coordinate across all these subgroups and make sure we weren't working against each other. I also had to take data and information from each of these subgroups and try to come up with decisions about what we'd do next. And I often only had 30 seconds, a minute or two to make these decisions. And as I mentioned, we're working throughout the night on many occasions, so people were tired and very frustrated. It was exhausting for me, and I really didn't know if I could handle the challenge. To make matters worse, sometimes peers or executives would come in and try to help. And I know they probably didn't mean it this way, but it felt like all they were there to do was criticize me. In fact, one time my VP walked in and front of 40 people in the room, dressed me down for a decision I'd made. It was very frustrating, and I heard people murmuring, she doesn't have IT background, maybe she's not the right person for the job. And I started to wonder if maybe that was true. But at some point, I realized I needed to take my technology disadvantage and make it an advantage. So I learned to not assume anything. Because I knew nothing about IT, I could assume nothing. And so I started from a very logical standpoint. I assumed that every part of the system was potentially guilty until it was proven innocent of any wrongdoing. I let the other people, like the great people on my team, be the technology experts. And I focused on being this person asking the stupid questions and being the sounding board for their ideas. I finally realized that this was a really great role for me to play. I could be the dumb person, let them be the experts, and slowly, one by one, we started addressing each of the issues and fixing them. This methodical approach was something that I would use later in my career as well. A couple of years later, I'd moved over to the marketing department. And I was in charge of the Walmart Circular. For those of you who know about the Walmart Circular, it's very competitive. Every buyer wants to have their item in the Walmart Circular. So they're fighting with each other, they're fighting with me, and they're all making very convincing arguments about why their products should be in the circular, and there I was stuck in the middle of all of them. If I ever said no to a buyer, he would go to his VP. If I said no to the VP, he would go to the senior VP, and so on and so forth. And oftentimes, these decisions that I'd made got revisited and revisited all the way up to the EVP of merchandising. And in fact, there are some people who shall remain nameless that instead of calling me Niru, started calling me Noru because I kept saying no to them. And what I learned is, yeah, it's a reality. My decisions are going to be reviewed, criticized, revisited. That's a fact of life. So I had to focus on making sure I was as objective as possible in assessing the products that were recommended for the circular. I had to get data from reports, from the buyers, and from my own experience and from research, and use that information to make a decision about what I would recommend to go into the circular. And what I learned from that experience was how to make decisions in a very methodical way and to back them up and stand up for them. I took all the experience I'd had in the ISD war rooms where I had been under heavy fire and criticism and had to stand up for my ideas and how to move forward in the war rooms and applied them to the marketing process as well. Fast forward a few years. As some of you may know, in July 2012, we opened the first Hindu temple in the area. This was a huge achievement. The Hindu Association of Northwest Arkansas had been dreaming of this and planning on it and working on it for over 12 years. And so we're very pleased to finally have a temple that we could go to. In 2010, I joined the board of the Hindu Association, and in January 2012, I became president. And it's really been an awesome responsibility and great privilege to be part of building the temple and now running it. But the fact of the matter was, I wasn't always keen to have this role. I really didn't think that I had the skill set necessary to be president of a Hindu temple and to run such an important organization. There's a number of reasons why I was reluctant to have that role. First of all, I was one of those people who would always consider herself more spiritual rather than actively religious. Second of all, I grew up in the United States, and like many people who grew up here, and many Hindus who grew up here, I knew surprisingly little about the rituals and prayers of Hinduism. I couldn't explain to people what our belief system was. I knew very little, and in fact, it's still a running joke about how little I know. Another thing was that I had a job where I was traveling every week, and so I was barely in the area to even be a president. How could I possibly be a leader? Another thing that was really critical for me was that I was a single woman, and that's very non-traditional at my age, which I won't mention, but trust me, it's non-traditional at my age. There have been very few female board members in the past, and I would be the first female president. So, really, would people even perceive me as a leader? And there were a countless number of issues that I could think of as to why I couldn't be the right person for this role. And finally I said, I need to just stop whining. This is an important role for people in this community, and I need to stop whining and think about what I could bring to the role instead. So for the next few months, I focused on what I could bring to the role. One of the most important things that I do now as president, since I obviously got over that and became president, one of the most important things I do is moderate discussions among the members about key topics, the pricing of our temple services, the hours that will be open, things like that. But one of the most important decisions I had to be involved in was the design and construction of the new temple. And that was a project that I took on personally. And you may think that as president I have some actual authority, but in fact that's not the case. It's an organization that's funded by the community and run by volunteers. And so it's all about consensus. And if you've ever been involved in a religious organization, you know that people have very passionate beliefs. And they really stand up for their beliefs, and that's to be commended. But India is a country of diversity. Hinduism is a religion of diversity. And so everyone had very diverse beliefs. And when you're having a conversation in a group like that, it's very spirited, very passionate. Being able to get your words out and even get a sentence out fully is very difficult. Getting to consensus is practically impossible. And the next thing is that people had very different visions of what the temple should look like. Here's a picture of a grand temple in India, which is the image that people had been dreaming of for 10 plus years. It's built in Agama Shastra, which is the spiritual form of how we build and manage temples. It's got very scientific principles around how everything is built. That's the vision that people had for 10 plus years. There were other people who were much more pragmatic and wanted a simple building. This is a joke, but it's really, a simple building that would be easy to build and be inexpensive and wouldn't be a financial burden on the community for many years to come. How could I possibly bridge the gap between such divergent thoughts? So what I did is I really focused on what I'd done in my past, what I learned in ISD, in those difficult war rooms, what I learned in marketing about being very analytical, and brought those skills and experience to bear. The first thing I did was focus on experts. I had never built a temple before. I'd never built anything before, let alone anything as important as this. So I had to focus on the experts to help me through it, and I used them shamelessly. One expert was an architect in California who had experience in building Hindu temples in the US. And he looked at our original idea, our vision for the grand temple, and he said it would cost $3 to $4 million to build. And we had at the time in our bank account about $300,000. So we said, you know what, we're probably not going for the grand temple idea, and let's focus on something simpler. Great. He helped us make a decision. I also had to rely on our local architect and builder from some of the most practical questions around construction. And I focused on asking them the stupid questions that I needed to have a good understanding of in order to be able to make decisions and communicate them back to the community. The rest of my board and some of the key influencers in the community were incredibly helpful. They helped me understand what the different groups within our community were expecting from the temple, what was important to them, whereas what they can compromise on. And I cannot overestimate the role that they played. They have been hugely important in this function. And what they did was they helped me understand, formulate my ideas, and then replicate those ideas out to the community. And they're very well respected, and in fact more respected and trusted than I am. And it was galling at times to be in a position where I'm not the most trusted member of the community. But I had to lay my pride aside and leverage their expertise, leverage the influence they have on the community, and use it to move our project forward. One of the most important experts that I had to rely on was my father. My father had been previously the president of the temple back home in Maryland. And he was the most important sounding board I had, as well as a very good source of research. Even though he hadn't made some of the same decisions I had to make, he helped me connect with people who had. So he played an important role in helping me build the temple and continuing to help me run the temple. The other thing I realized was, even though I'm not the expert, I need to stay in charge of the entire project. I can't allow other people to be in charge of it, or I would lose credibility as president. So I focused on being the connection that brought all these different experts together, and being a sounding board again for them, like I had been in the past, asking them the questions and helping them all logically get to the right answer. Another thing I focused on was my analytical skills that I'd used in the past. We were making decisions every day, and some of them big ones, hundreds of thousands of dollars, some of them little small ones. But what I had to do was gather the data from the different experts, analyze it, make a recommendation to the community, and then, if necessary, continue to communicate that decision and revisit it. There were some decisions, like whether or not to have windows in the temple, that were made and unmade and remade 4 or 5 times, similar to what I'd experienced in marketing. But I had to be patient and recognize that each person in the community had a right to voice their opinion and question what we as the board of directors was doing. So I prepared myself to document all the decisions and be prepared to explain them and re-explain them as necessary. And I think ultimately there was only one decision I made without any input from anyone else, and that was the color of the bathroom stalls. So if you ever come visit us at the temple and go to the bathroom, you'll know that those stalls were entirely picked out by me. But everything else was consensus driven and had to get input from a number of people. So I had to learn to be okay with criticism, be okay with being challenged. My past experience helped me do that and keep the emotional distance from the decisions, and know that those criticisms weren't about me particularly, but were about getting to the right place. And we ended up with a really lovely temple. It's a simple building with touches of the traditional elements, but the most important thing has been about what it's done for the community. People were so excited to see the temple finally built. They'd been dreaming about it for over 10 years. And over 1,000 people attended our grand opening. And there's about 2,500 Hindus in the Northwest Arkansas area, so we got a big part of the community to come. And the people who were there were overcome with emotion and joy at seeing their dream finally realized. So I'll probably never have the traditional skills of a Hindu temple leader and president. And I'd be foolish to think that not having those skills hadn't hurt me and hadn't made it harder for me to be successful. But what I found was that by bringing what I could bring to the role, I was able to make an impact. And I'd like to think that I actually had the skills that were critical at this juncture, at the time of designing and building our temple, in order to help move the project forward. And I encourage each person on the board of directors and everyone else in our community to do the same thing. Each of them has a piece of the puzzle. Each of them has unique skills and characteristics. And when each of us brings our piece of the puzzle, we get a complete picture. And as a group, we're able to build the temple, run it, and manage it in a meaningful way. And so my challenge to everyone here today is to, when you have an opportunity or a challenge, instead of focusing on why you can't do the role, please instead focus on the things you can bring to the role, because you might be really impressed at how effective you can be. Thank you very much.